Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance, staring at the massive object floating in the empty space ahead of them. The thing was huge, easily the size of a small moon, but it did not look like anything natural. Its surface was smooth and crystal-like, catching the light from distant stars and throwing it back in strange patterns. "Captain, I'm getting some weird readings from that thing," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Rodriguez from her station at the engineering console. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she tried to make sense of what her instruments were telling her. "The materials are unlike anything we have in our database, and there's energy coming from inside it." Jake nodded slowly. He had been exploring space for 15 years, but he had never seen anything quite like this. The object was floating in the void between star systems, far from any planet or sun. It should not exist here, yet here it was. "Any idea how old it is?" Jake asked. Lisa checked her readings again. "The computer estimates it's been here for at least 3 million years, maybe longer. Whatever built this thing, they're long gone." Dr. Amy Walsh looked up from her science station. She was the ship's expert on alien life forms, and her face showed both excitement and concern. "Captain, the energy pattern suggests this structure is still active. Whatever it was designed to do, it might still be doing it." Security Chief Tony Baker stepped closer to the main screen. He was a big man with scars on his hands from years of military service. "Could be a weapon of some kind," he said in his deep voice. "Maybe we should keep our distance?" Jake considered this. The smart thing would be to mark the location and report it to a fleet command. Let someone else figure out what it was. But Jake had not become an exploration captain by playing. "It's safe." "Any signs of life inside?" "No life signs," Amy replied. "But with that much interference from the energy fields, I can't be completely sure." Jake made his decision. "We're going to take a closer look? Lisa, bring us to within 1,000 meters. And hold position. Amy, I want a full sensor sweep." Tony, prepping away team. As the USS Vengeance moved closer to the strange structure, Jake could see more details on the main screen. The surface was not completely smooth as it had first appeared. There were patterns carved into it, designs that hurt his eyes to look at directly. They seemed to shift and change when he was not looking straight at them. "Captain," Lisa called. Out, her voice tight with surprise. "Something's happening." On the screen, a section of the structure's wall was changing. What had been solid crystal was becoming transparent, then opening like a doorway. The opening was perfectly sized for a small shuttle to pass through. "That's not possible," Amy whispered. "How did it know we were here?" Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The structure had been waiting in empty space for millions of years, and the moment they arrived, it opened a door for them. "Any threats detected?" Tony checked his security readings. "No weapons fire, no hostile movement." "But Captain, this feels like a trap." "Everything in space could be a trap," Jake replied. "That's why we're out here instead of sitting safe at home." He turned to Lisa. "How's the shuttle bay?" "Shuttle 1 is ready for launch," she confirmed. Jake nodded. "Then we're going in. Tony, you're with me. Lisa, Amy, you too? I want engineering and science eyes on whatever we find in there." 20 minutes later, the 4 officers sat in Shuttle 1 as it approached the mysterious opening in the alien structure. Jake piloted the small craft while his team ran final checks on their equipment. Each of them wore a full environmental suit and carried enough supplies for 6 hours. "Remember," Jake said over the comm system, "we're just taking a look. First sign of trouble, we're out of there." The shuttle passed through the opening, and immediately Jake knew they were in something far beyond human technology. The walls around them glowed with a soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The passage was wide enough for their shuttle, but Jake decided to land and continue on foot. "The atmosphere is breathable," Amy reported as they exited the shuttle. "Oxygen and nitrogen mix, though there are trace elements I don't recognize." Lisa held up her scanner. "Gravity is Earth normal, temperature is comfortable. Whoever built this place wanted visitors to be comfortable." Tony kept his hand near his weapon. "Or they wanted to make sure visitors stayed alive long enough for whatever they had planned." The group moved deeper into the structure. The walls were covered in the same shifting patterns they had seen outside. The floor beneath their feet felt solid, but it seemed to glow faintly with each step they took. "Captain," Amy said, stopping suddenly. "My scanner is picking up something ahead. There's a large chamber about 50 meters in that direction." Jake nodded. "Lead the way." As they walked, Lisa noticed something troubling. "The energy readings are getting stronger, and my instruments are starting to give conflicting data." "What kind of conflicting data?" Jake asked. "Well, my scanner says the gravity here is 1G, but it also says it's 3G, and the temperature reads as both 20 degrees and -40 degrees at the same time." Amy checked her own equipment. "I'm getting similar readings. It's like reality itself is unstable in here." They reached the chamber Amy had detected, and all four humans stopped in amazement. The room was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. In the center stood a pillar of the same crystal material as the walls, but this one pulsed with energy that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "There," Tony said, pointing to the far side of the chamber. "Another passage." Jake studied the room carefully. His instincts, trained by years of dangerous missions, told him something was wrong. The chamber was too perfect, too inviting. "Amy, any idea what this place is?" Amy was studying her readings with growing excitement and fear. "Captain, based on the energy patterns and the way this chamber is designed, I think this whole structure is some kind of testing facility." "Testing what?" Lisa asked. "Life forms," Amy replied quietly. "I think this place was designed to test how different species react to various conditions. And based on the residual energy signatures, it's been testing species for a very long time." Jake felt the chill return. "How many species?" Amy checked her scanner again. "Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands." Tony looked around the chamber with new understanding. "And what happened to all those species?" Amy did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not detecting any signs that any of them made it through the tests." Before anyone could respond, the opening they had entered through began to glow brighter. Jake turned to look and felt his heart sink. The doorway was sealing itself, the crystal wall reforming as if it had never been opened. "Back to the shuttle," Jake ordered, but even as he said it, he knew it was too late. The passage back to their shuttle was already gone, replaced by solid wall. They were trapped inside an alien structure that had tested thousands of species over millions of years. And according to Amy's readings, none of those species had survived. Jake looked at his team. Lisa was checking her equipment, trying to find a way out. Amy was scanning the walls for any weakness. Tony was watching the other passages that led deeper into the structure, ready for whatever might come. "Well," Jake said finally, "I guess we're going to find out what happened to all those other species." The structure around them began to hum with energy, and Jake knew the test was about to begin. The humming sound grew louder, and Jake could feel it in his bones. The walls around them began to change color, shifting from the soft glow they had seen before to a harsh, pulsing red light. The air itself seemed to become thicker, making it harder to breathe even through their suit filters. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice tight with concern, "my readings are going crazy. The radiation levels just jumped to lethal doses." Jake checked his own suit's radiation detector. The numbers on the small screen were climbing rapidly into ranges that should have killed them already, yet he felt fine. "A little uncomfortable." "Maybe, but nothing like what the instruments said he should be feeling." "How lethal are we talking about?" he asked. Lisa looked at her scanner again, then tapped it as if it might be broken. "According to this, we should all be dead right now. The radiation in here is strong enough to cook a person in seconds." Amy was studying her own equipment with a puzzled expression. "That's impossible. We're not even getting sick. I mean, I can feel something like a mild headache, but nothing like what these readings suggest." Tony was more practical. He pointed down one of the passages leading away from the chamber. "Well, whatever's happening, standing here isn't going to help us. We need to find another way out." Jake nodded. "Amy's right, though. If the radiation is really as bad as our instruments say, we should be dying. Either our equipment is wrong or something else is going on. As they moved toward the passage Tony had indicated, the floor beneath their feet began to feel strange. It was still solid, but now it seemed to pulse with energy that traveled up through their boots and into their legs. The gravity is changing, Lisa announced, stumbling slightly as she walked. It just went from 1G to 3G, then back to 1G, all in the space of 2 seconds. Jake felt the shifts too. For a moment, his body felt 3 times heavier than normal, making each step an effort. Then suddenly he felt light again, almost floating. It should have been disorienting enough to make him sick, but instead he just adjusted his pace and kept walking. "This is definitely a test," Amy said as they entered the new passage. "The structure is trying different things to see how we react." The passage was longer than the first one, and as they walked, new challenges appeared. The temperature began to change rapidly. Jake's suit readings showed the air around them dropping to freezing, then jumping to desert heat, then back to freezing again. "-20 degrees, Lisa read from her scanner. "Now it's 40 degrees above zero. Now it's back to -30. Tony wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold readings. "I'm hot, but not burning up. Cold, but not freezing. It's like my body is handling this better than it should." They continued deeper into the structure, and the tests became more extreme. The walls began to emit sounds that hurt to hear. High-pitched whines that should have damaged their hearing, low rumbles that should have made them sick. Jake could feel the sounds affecting him, but not nearly as much as they should have. "These frequencies are designed to cause pain," Amy said, pressing her hands to her ears. "Some of them should be breaking our bones." "They hurt," Jake admitted, "but I've heard worse at rock concerts." The passage opened into another chamber, this one filled with a strange mist that swirled and moved like it was alive. The mist glowed with different colors, and as they walked through it, Jake could feel it trying to get into his suit. "Chemical analysis shows this mist is highly toxic," Amy reported, her voice muffled by the thick air. "It contains compounds that should dissolve organic tissue on contact." Lisa checked her suit's seals nervously. "Are our suits holding up?" "They seem to be," Amy replied, "but even trace amounts of this stuff getting through should be enough to kill us." They pushed through the mist and found themselves facing their biggest challenge yet. The passage ahead split into 3 different directions, and each one glowed with a different type of danger. The left passage flickered with electrical energy that arced between the walls. The middle passage was filled with a blinding light that hurt to look at. The right passage was completely dark, so black that their suit lights seemed to be absorbed by the darkness. "Pick your poison," Tony said grimly. Jake studied the 3 options. "Amy, what do your readings tell us about each one?" Amy pointed her scanner at each passage in turn. "The electrical passage is generating enough power to run a small city. The light passage is putting out radiation across the entire spectrum, including gamma rays. The dark passage is ... strange. It's not just an absence of light. It's like it's actively absorbing energy. So, death by electricity, death by radiation, or death by darkness absorption?" Lisa summarized. Jake thought about their options. On Earth, humans had learned to deal with electrical hazards. They had developed ways to survive high radiation. And darkness was just the absence of light, something humans had been dealing with since they lived in caves. "We go middle," Jake decided. "The radiation passage. We've already survived more radiation than our instruments say is possible. Maybe we can handle a little more." As they entered the middle passage, the light became so bright that their suit visors automatically darkened to protect their eyes. Jake could feel the radiation hitting his body like a physical weight, but, again, he was surprised by how well he was handling it. "This level of radiation should be turning us into ash," Amy said, her voice filled with wonder. "But I just feel tired, like I've been working in the sun too long." The passage seemed to go on forever, and with each step, the radiation grew stronger. Jake's suit was now reading levels that should have been instantly fatal to any known life form, yet they kept walking. "You know what this reminds me of?" Tony said suddenly. Remember those survival training exercises in the desert? When they made us walk for hours in full gear under the blazing sun. Lisa nodded. Or that time we had to work in the reactor room when the shielding was down for maintenance. This feels worse, but not impossibly worse. As they continued through the radiation passage, Jake began to understand what was happening. The structure was testing them with conditions that would kill most life forms instantly. But humans had evolved on a world where radiation, temperature changes, gravity variations, and toxic environments were part of daily life. Earth's sun bombarded the planet with radiation every day. Earth's weather could change from freezing to scorching in hours. Earth's gravity was strong enough to crush most alien life forms. Earth's atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a gas so reactive it was toxic to many species. We're not dying because we're already used to this, Jake said with sudden realization. Earth has been testing us our whole lives. They emerged from the radiation passage into another chamber, this one larger than any they had seen before. In the center was a massive crystal formation that pulsed with energy. Around the walls were what looked like viewing screens, each showing data in languages they could not read. Amy walked over to one of the screens and studied it carefully. Captain, I think these are records. Data about different species that have been tested here. How many species? Jake asked. Amy spent several minutes working with her scanner, trying to translate the alien symbols. When she finally looked up, her face was pale. Over 10,000 different species have been tested in this structure. And according to these records, the tests have been getting more difficult over time. Lisa joined Amy at the screens. What happened to all those species? Amy's voice was quiet when she answered. None of them made it past the third level of testing. Most died in the first few minutes. Tony looked around the chamber with new respect. And how many levels are there total? Amy checked the data again, hoping she had made a mistake. She had not. 10 levels. We just finished level 1. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature changes they had been experiencing. They had barely survived the first test, and there were 9 more to go. Tests that had killed over 10,000 different species, but as he looked at his team, Jake realized something important. They had not barely survived. They had walked through conditions that should have killed them instantly, and while they were tired and uncomfortable, they were alive and alert. The good news, Jake said finally, is that we're still here. The bad news is that we're just getting started. The chamber began to change around them, and Jake knew that level 2 was about to begin. The second level began without warning. The floor beneath their feet suddenly disappeared, and Jake found himself falling through empty space. For a moment he thought they were going to die, but then he hit something soft that felt like thick gel. He sank into it slowly, giving him time to look around. His team had landed nearby in the same strange substance. It was clear and felt warm against their suits. Jake tried to move and found that he could swim through it, though it was much thicker than water. Everyone okay? He called out through his comm system. Define okay, Lisa replied, struggling to right herself in the gel. I'm alive, but this stuff is trying to get into my suit. Amy was already scanning the substance with her equipment. It's not just trying to get into our suits. It's actively trying to dissolve them. This is some kind of acid designed to break down protective materials. Jake looked at his suit's status display. The outer layer was indeed being eaten away, but much more slowly than Amy's readings suggested it should be. How long do we have? According to my scanner, our suits should have been completely dissolved already, Amy said, sounding confused. But they're holding up much better than they should. Tony was testing the limits of the gel by trying to swim upward. There's a platform about 10 meters up, he reported. If we can get there, we might be out of this acid bath. Jake started swimming toward where Tony was pointing. The gel was thick and made movement difficult, but it was not impossible. It reminded him of swimming in mud as a child, something that had seemed fun at the time, but was probably more dangerous than he had realized. As they swam, the gel began to change. Jake felt a tingling sensation on his skin even through his suit. His suit's internal sensors started showing warnings about biological contamination. "The acid is changing," Amy called out as she struggled through the thick substance. "Now it's releasing biological agents. Bacteria and viruses designed to attack living tissue." Jake could feel the microscopic attackers trying to get through his suit's filtration system. Some of them were succeeding. But instead of getting sick, he just felt a little dizzy, like he was coming down with a mild cold. "I can feel them," Lisa said, "but it's not that bad. I felt worse during flu season." They reached the platform and pulled themselves out of the gel. Jake's suit was damaged but still working. More importantly, despite being exposed to acid and biological weapons that should have killed them, his team was alive and functional. The platform led to another passage, this one filled with a sound that made Jake's teeth ache. It was not just loud, it was the wrong kind of sound, like someone scratching fingernails on a blackboard, but 1,000 times worse. "Sonic weapons," Tony identified, covering his ears despite his helmet. "This frequency is designed to disrupt brain function." Jake forced himself to walk forward into the sound. It was terrible, making his head pound and his vision blur, but he had heard worse. Construction sites, jet engines, rock concerts, all had prepared him for loud, unpleasant sounds. "Keep moving," he shouted over the noise. "It's just sound. It can't actually hurt us." But as they walked deeper into the sonic assault, Jake realized he was wrong. This was not just sound. His suit's readings showed that the vibrations were strong enough to shake apart molecular bonds. The sound was literally trying to tear their bodies apart at the atomic level, yet they kept walking. Jake's bones ached and his muscles felt like they were vibrating, but he did not fall apart. His team stayed with him, all of them pushing through pain that should have been impossible to endure. "How are we not dead?" Lisa shouted over the noise. Amy checked her scanner while they walked. "Human bone density," she called back. "Our skeletons are much denser than most species because we evolved in high gravity. The vibrations can't break us apart as easily." They emerged from the sonic passage into a chamber that was completely silent. The sudden absence of sound was almost as disorienting as the noise had been. In the center of the chamber was a pool of what looked like liquid metal. "Mercury?" Tony guessed. Amy scanned it carefully. "No, it's something much more dangerous. This liquid contains heavy metals that are toxic to most life forms. Lead, mercury, cadmium, and several others I don't recognize." Jake walked to the edge of the pool. There was no way around it, and the only exit from the chamber was on the other side. "We have to go through it." "Captain," Amy protested, "even brief contact with this stuff could cause permanent brain damage." Jake thought about the mines and factories on Earth where people worked with dangerous metals every day. They wore protection and took precautions, but humans had learned to live with these hazards. "We don't have a choice. Everyone check your suit seals." They waded into the toxic pool. The liquid metal was thick and heavy, making each step an effort. Jake could feel it trying to eat through his suit, but again, the damage was slower than it should have been. Halfway across the pool, Jake felt something else. A pressure in his mind, like someone was trying to push thoughts into his head. The thoughts were not his own. They were alien, cold, and filled with images of death and failure. "Psychic attack," Amy said through gritted teeth. "The structure is trying to break our minds." Jake felt the alien presence in his thoughts, trying to convince him to give up, to lie down in the toxic pool and die. The thoughts were powerful and came with images of all the species that had died here before them. He saw beings dissolving in acid, crushed by gravity, burned by radiation, driven insane by sounds and thoughts. But Jake had grown up in Chicago, had served in 3 different wars, and had seen his share of death and failure. The alien thoughts were disturbing, but they were not worse than some of his own memories. "Think about home," he told his team. "Think about Earth. Think about surviving things that tried to kill you before you ever left the planet." They reached the other side of the pool and climbed out onto a metal platform. Jake's suit was heavily damaged now, but it was still protecting him. More importantly, his mind was still his own. The next test came immediately. The platform they stood on began to heat up rapidly. Jake's suit readings showed the temperature climbing to levels that should have melted their boots in seconds. Extreme. Heat test, Lisa said, trying to find a cool spot to stand on. This is hot enough to melt steel. Jake felt the heat through his boots, but it was not unbearable. It reminded him of walking on hot sand at the beach or standing too close to a campfire, unpleasant but manageable. Earth's core is molten metal, he said. Humans have been living with volcanoes and desert heat for thousands of years. We can handle this. As they stood on the superheated platform, waiting for the test to end, Amy made an important discovery. She was studying the chamber around them when she noticed something in the wall patterns. "Captain, these walls are covered with information," she said excitedly. "Data about every species that has been tested here." Jake looked where she was pointing. The alien symbols seemed to shift and change as he watched, but Amy's scanner was translating them into readable text. "What does it say?" he asked. Amy worked with her scanner for several minutes before answering. "It's a record of weaknesses. Every species that came here was analyzed, and the structure learned exactly what would kill them. But Captain, there's something else." "What?" "There's no data about humans. No information about Earth. The structure doesn't know what we are or where we come from." Jake felt a moment of understanding. The ancient builders of this structure had cataloged thousands of species from across the galaxy. They had learned how to kill anything that might threaten them. But they had never encountered Earth. They never found us because they thought our planet was too dangerous to support intelligent life, he realized. Tony grinned, despite their situation. They were wrong about the intelligent part. The heat test ended and a new passage opened before them. As they walked toward it, Jake thought about what they had learned. The structure was designed to kill any species that might pose a threat to its builders. It had succeeded against over 10,000 different alien races, but it had never tested humans before. It did not know that humans had evolved on a world where acid rain was common, where radiation from space bombarded the surface daily, where toxic metals could be found in the water supply, where temperature extremes were part of normal weather. The builders had created the perfect killing machine. But they had never imagined a species crazy enough to evolve on a world that was already trying to kill them every single day. Jake led his team into the third level, wondering what new horrors awaited them, but feeling more confident than before. They were still alive, and they were learning something important about themselves. They were harder to kill than anyone had expected. The third level brought new challenges that Jake had not expected. Instead of physical dangers, this test was about time itself. As they entered the new chamber, Jake felt something wrong with the way time was moving. His watch was running fast, then slow, then backwards. "Time distortion field," Amy said, her voice sounding strange as the words came out at different speeds. "The structure is manipulating how time flows around us." Jake watched his team move in slow motion, then speed, up to a blur, then return to normal. It should have been impossible to function in such conditions. Most beings would have been torn apart by the conflicting time streams. But humans had always lived with time feeling different in stressful situations. Combat veterans knew how time could slow down during a firefight. Athletes knew how time could speed up during competition. "Stay together," Jake called out, his words echoing strangely in the shifting time field. "Don't try to fight it. Just move forward." They walked through 7 more levels, each one designed to exploit a different weakness that the ancient builders had found in other species. Level 4 tested them with gravity so strong it should have crushed their bones to powder. Level 5 exposed them to cold so extreme it should have frozen their blood solid. Level 6 surrounded them with electricity that should have stopped their hearts instantly. Each time, Jake's team survived what should have been impossible. They were tired, their suits were damaged, and they were starting to feel the effects of everything they had endured. But they were alive. It was during level 7 that Amy made the discovery that changed everything. This level was different from the others. Instead of trying to kill them, it seemed designed to communicate. The walls were covered with symbols and images that her scanner could translate. "Captain," Amy said, stopping in the middle of the chamber, "I think I understand what this place really is." Jake paused beside her, grateful for a chance to rest. "What do you mean?" Amy pointed her scanner at the wall displays, reading the translated text that appeared on her screen. "This isn't just a weapon or a test, it's a record. The beings who built this place, they weren't trying to kill everyone who found it. They were looking for something. Looking for what?" Lisa asked. Amy continued, reading, her eyes growing wide as she understood more of the ancient text. "They were looking for a species strong enough to take their place. Captain, the builders of this structure were fleeing from something that destroyed their entire civilization." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold they had endured in Level 5. Fleeing from what? Amy worked with her scanner for several more minutes, translating more of the ancient records. When she finally looked up, her face was pale. "They called it the Dark Tide, something from outside our galaxy that consumes everything in its path. Stars, planets, entire solar systems. The builders tried to fight it, but they failed." Tony joined them at the wall display. "So they built this place to find someone else who could fight it?" "Not just anyone," Amy replied. "They needed a species that could survive anything. The tests aren't designed to kill intruders. They're designed to find a species tough enough to face something that destroyed beings far more advanced than humanity." Jake studied the images on the wall. They showed star maps, battle formations, and what looked like evacuation plans. The builders had been preparing for a final retreat when they created this structure. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. Amy translated more text. "According to this, the Dark Tide moves slowly between galaxies. It destroyed the builders' home galaxy over 5 million years ago, but it's been moving toward our galaxy ever since." Lisa checked her engineering scanner against the star charts on the wall. 5 million years is a long time. "Maybe it's not coming here." Amy shook her head. "It is coming. And according to these calculations, it will reach the outer edge of our galaxy in less than 1,000 years. The chamber around them began to change again, and Jake realized they were being moved to the next level. But now he understood why. The structure was not trying to kill them. It was testing them to see if humanity was strong enough to inherit the responsibility the builders could not handle. Level 8 was the worst yet. The chamber filled with a gas that attacked their nervous systems directly. Jake felt his body trying to shut down as the gas interfered with the signals between his brain and his muscles. His vision blurred, his hands shook, and his legs felt weak, but he kept walking. Humans had been dealing with nerve damage from diseases, injuries, and toxins for thousands of years. They had learned to function even when their bodies were not working properly. Level 9 tested their ability to work together under impossible stress. The chamber split them apart, putting each team member in a separate section connected only by narrow bridges over deep pits filled with molten metal. They had to coordinate their movements perfectly to open the doors that would let them continue. Jake called out instructions while trying to balance on a bridge, barely wide enough for his feet. Lisa worked with damaged equipment while standing on a platform that shook constantly. Amy translated alien controls while surrounded by toxic fumes. Tony provided security while dodging electrical discharges that could have killed him. Somehow, they made it through. Jake was beginning to understand that the tests were not just about surviving individual challenges. They were about proving that humans could work together, think clearly, and solve problems even under conditions that would drive most species insane. Finally, they reached level 10. The last test. Jake expected this one to be the most difficult, but instead, they found themselves in a chamber that felt almost peaceful. The walls showed star charts and technical diagrams. In the center was a platform with what looked like a control interface. "This is it," Amy said, studying her readings. "The final test is not about surviving something. It's about making a choice." Jake approached the control interface. The symbols on it were different from the others they had seen, but somehow he could understand their meaning. There were two options. The first would shut down the structure and allow them to leave. The second would activate systems throughout the galaxy, preparing defenses against the coming dark tide. If we choose the first option, Amy explained, reading from her scanner, we go home and pretend this never happened. We live normal lives until the dark tide arrives and destroys everything. And the second option? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. We accept responsibility for defending the galaxy. The structure will give us access to ancient technologies and weapons, but we also accept the burden of preparing for a war that might not come for 1,000 years. Jake looked at his team. They were exhausted, injured, and far from home. They had survived tests that had killed thousands of other species. Now they were being asked to take on a responsibility. That had been too much for beings far more advanced than humanity. What do you think? He asked them. Lisa was the first to answer. We came out here to explore, to find new things. This is definitely new, Tony nodded. Someone has to fight this dark tide thing. Might as well be us. Amy looked at the star charts showing their galaxy. The builders trusted us enough to get this far. Maybe they knew something about humans that we didn't know about ourselves. Jake thought about Earth, about all the challenges humanity had faced and survived. Wars, diseases, natural disasters, climate changes. Humans had a long history of taking on impossible challenges and somehow finding ways to win. He reached for the second option on the control interface. We accept, he said. The moment his hand touched the control, the entire structure came alive with energy. Information flowed into his mind, showing him technologies beyond human understanding, strategies for galactic defense, and the locations of other structures like this one scattered throughout the galaxy. Jake now understood the final truth about the tests. The builders had not been looking for the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced. They had been looking for the most stubborn. They had been looking for a species too stubborn to quit, too stubborn to surrender, and too stubborn to accept that some challenges could not be overcome. They had been looking for humans. The moment Jake accepted humanity's role as galactic defenders, the structure around them transformed completely. The walls became transparent, showing the vast emptiness of space beyond. But they were no longer in the same chamber where they had made their choice. Where are we? Lisa asked, looking around at what appeared to be a massive control room filled with technology that hurt to look at directly. Amy checked her scanner, but the readings made no sense. According to this, we're everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I think we've been moved to the core of the structure. Jake felt different too. The information that had flowed into his mind when he touched the control was still there, but now it was organized and clear. He knew things about galactic defense networks, ancient weapons, and technologies that humanity would not discover for thousands of years, but the knowledge came with a warning. Before they could claim their inheritance as the galaxy's new defenders, they had to pass one final test. Not a test of survival or problem-solving, but a test of will. The core chamber is ahead, Jake said, the knowledge appearing in his mind as he spoke. But getting there means walking through the combined nightmares of every species that failed. Before us, a new passage opened before them, and Jake could see that it was different from all the others. This one glowed with an evil light that seemed to eat at his eyes. The air itself looked twisted, as if reality was not working properly. Inside, what exactly does that mean? Tony asked, though his hand was already moving toward his weapon. Jake felt the answer form in his mind. Every species that died in this structure left an imprint of their worst fears and greatest pain. The core chamber is protected by all of that combined suffering. We have to walk through it without being broken by it. Amy's scanner was giving readings that should have been impossible. Energy levels that could power a star, gravity fields that could collapse matter into black holes, radiation that could sterilize entire planets, and something else. Something that's not quite real but is definitely dangerous. They entered the passage, and immediately Jake knew they were in a place where the normal rules did not apply. The walls showed images of species dying in agony, their final moments of terror and despair playing over and over again. The air was filled with the sounds of screaming, crying, and begging that came from 10,000 different throats. "This is what hell looks like?" Lisa whispered. But she kept walking. The passage was longer than any they had crossed before, and with each step the horrors around them became more intense. Jake saw entire civilizations being destroyed, planets being torn apart, stars going dark as the dark tide consumed them. He felt the fear and hopelessness of billions of beings who had faced impossible odds and lost, but he also felt something else. These beings had given up. When faced with the ultimate challenge, they had decided it was too much for them. They had chosen to run, to hide, or to simply accept defeat. "Keep walking," Jake told his team. "Don't look at the images. Don't listen to the sounds. Think about home." Halfway through the passage, the structure began its final assault on their minds. Jake felt gravity trying to crush him flat against the floor. The pressure was so intense that his bones should have been ground to powder, but he had felt heavy gravity before in the earlier tests. This was worse, but not impossibly worse. The temperature dropped to absolute zero, then jumped to the heat of a star's core. Jake's suit should have failed completely, but somehow it held together. The cold reminded him of winter nights camping in the mountains. The heat reminded him of working in factory furnaces. Uncomfortable, but not unbearable. Radiation levels climbed to amounts that could have powered entire cities. Jake felt it hitting his body like a physical force, but it was just more radiation. Earth's sun had been bombarding him with radiation his entire life. This was worse, but his body knew how to handle it. The biological attacks came next. Viruses and bacteria that could dissolve flesh in seconds, toxins that could stop a heart with a single molecule, acids that could eat through any known material. Jake felt them all attacking his body at once, but his immune system had been fighting off Earth's aggressive microorganisms since birth. These alien attackers were fierce, but they were not worse than what he had already survived. "How are we? Still alive?" Amy asked, her voice strained but determined. Jake realized he finally understood the answer. "Because we're from Earth, because our planet has been trying to kill us since the day humans first stood upright. Because we learned to survive in conditions that would kill most life forms before we ever left our own atmosphere. The psychic attacks were the worst. The structure tried to fill their minds with despair, showing them futures where the dark tide destroyed everything they cared about. Jake saw Earth being consumed, saw his family and friends dying in agony, saw the last human cities falling to darkness, but he had seen worse things in his own nightmares. He had lived through wars where good people died for no reason. He had lost friends to accidents, diseases, and violence. He knew that bad things happened to good people, and that sometimes there was nothing you could do to stop it. The difference was that this time there was something he could do. 3/4 of the way through the passage, reality itself began to break down around them. The walls showed impossible geometries that hurt to look at. Time moved in circles, making them experience the same moment over and over again. Space folded in on itself, making distances meaningless. This is what drove the other species insane. Amy realized, the structure is showing us the true nature of the dark tide. It doesn't just destroy matter and energy. It destroys the rules that make existence possible. Jake forced himself to keep walking even as the universe seemed to collapse around him. He had grown up in a world where nothing made perfect sense, where the rules could change without warning, where the only constant was change itself. This was worse, but it was not completely alien to human experience. Finally, they reached the end of the passage and stepped into the core chamber. Jake expected to find some kind of massive computer or control system, but instead he found something much simpler. It was a room with walls covered in star charts and a single chair in the center. "That's it?" Tony asked. "After everything we've been through, the core of this ancient structure is a chair?" Jake approached the chair and understood. It was not just a chair. It was a connection point, a way for a living being to interface directly with the structures, systems, and through them, with defense networks scattered throughout the galaxy. But more than that, it was a test of character. Anyone who sat in that chair would have the power to control weapons that could destroy star systems. technologies that could reshape matter at the atomic level, and knowledge that could advance any civilization by millions of years. The question was whether they could be trusted with that power. Jake looked at his team. They had walked through literal hell to get here, had survived tests that had killed thousands of other species, and had never once considered giving up or turning back. What happens now? Lisa asked. Jake sat down in the chair and immediately felt his consciousness expand to fill the galaxy. He could sense other structures like this one, hidden throughout space, waiting for activation. He could feel the defensive networks that the ancient builders had constructed, dormant but ready to wake up. And far away, at the very edge of his expanded awareness, he could sense something else. Something dark and hungry, moving slowly but inevitably toward their galaxy. The dark tide was coming, but now humanity was ready for it. Jake opened his eyes and looked at his team. Now we go home and start preparing. We have a galaxy to defend and about 1,000 years to get ready. Amy smiled despite everything they had been through. Think that's enough time? Jake stood up from the chair, feeling the weight of his new responsibility, but also feeling confident. Humans had always been good at preparing for disasters. They had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and their own tendency toward warfare. It'll have to be, he said. Because one way or another, when that thing gets here, it's going to find out what happens when you mess with a species crazy enough to evolve on a death world. The structure around them began to change one final time, opening a direct passage back to their shuttle. But Jake knew they were not the same people who had entered this place. They were no longer just explorers from Earth. They were the galaxy's new guardians, and they had work to do.